We're back for your ears only. I'm Melissa Exelberth.
I'm David Alpern with this quote from the news. It is such a vicious battlefield and an important one as it is the biggest single segment in the business. That was auto analyst Michelle Krebs of Edmunds.com on reports of the strongest July since 2006 for American car makers, boosted particularly by the sale of small and mid-sized sedans. And the Labor Department said unemployment fell from 7.6 to 7.4% nationwide for the month, though with a lower than expected 162,000 new jobs. Now this.
I'd be happy to listen to any other plan someone can come up with, given the restraints that we're working under. The reality is, with the $12 billion in unsecured debt, there's precious little we can do.
In fact, Detroit's total long-term debt is greater than $18 billion, and the bitter pill bankruptcy plan implied by state-appointed emergency manager Kevin Orr is still a work in progress that must eventually win approval from a required percentage of the city's creditors and federal bankruptcy judge Stephen Rhodes, who last week set a quick August 19th deadline for all objections to the largest municipal bankruptcy in U.S. history. How it all plays out will largely determine the fate of the nation's former Motor City and perhaps set a pattern for other urban financial crises in a period of large-scale financial transformation.
Even before the protection of bankruptcy, there are some positive signs. Despite all the debts and thousands of deserted buildings, the most recent census shows that a 5-year decline in business creation has actually halted and even edged slightly upward in 2011. Detroit Venture Partners has created a $50 million fund to invest in local tech startups, and the number of state college graduates who stay in the area has grown from 51% to 63% in the last 5 years.
To consider the prospects and pitfalls facing Detroit and other threatened urban corners of America, for your ears only, we're joined now by Richard C. Harwood, founder and president of the nonprofit Harwood Institute for Public Innovation. He's also the author, most recently, of The Work of Hope: How Individuals and Organizations Can Authentically Do Good. Welcome to our show.
Melissa, thanks for having me today.
You've written that Detroit is not dead and mentioned a vigorous strain of youthful entrepreneurs. What do you see as the most important factors drawing them there?
Well, I think there's clearly some financial factors. You know, it's less expensive to do business there. There's some tax breaks. But, you know, what you hear from Detroit entrepreneurs, I think, is as much psychological, and it's that they want to be part of the Detroit turnaround. They want to be part of something larger than themselves. They want to be part of helping this community move forward, and that's exciting to them, and I think that's an important aspect of this.
Well, you say that as important as the numbers is the narrative that a story can tell. Talk more about that.
Well, you know, a lot of the news that's coming out of Detroit these days, particularly with the bankruptcy, is that this town is dead. I've heard many people say we ought to just leave it behind. And yet, if that's the narrative of the community moving forward, narratives drive our attitudes, behaviors, and actions. But, you know, there's another narrative that's starting to emerge in Detroit, not as strong as the dominant one of bankruptcy and decline, but a positive one nonetheless, which is, as you said early in the intro, there are new folks moving downtown to start up businesses. There's new venture capital funds. Buildings are being renovated. And these pockets of change together create a counter-narrative to the dominant one of decline and bankruptcy. What's important moving forward now is how they cultivate this narrative, how they spread it, how they spread these pockets so that it can gain a stronger trajectory and a stronger sense of momentum moving forward. Last point on this. What we know is that as communities come back, there's this competition between these narratives, and we've got to cultivate the more positive one to give people a sense of hope and possibility.
Well, you've warned the bankruptcy planners not to sacrifice the soul of the city. What exactly does that mean?
Well, I think, you know, it's easy to look at solving the financial crisis today and having lost the soul of the city moving forward. And by that, what I mean is that it's a simple point that we need to be really aware of what assets. You know, Kevin Orr said, let's put all the assets on the table. I agree with him. We need to put all the assets on the table. But that includes, for instance, art from the Detroit Institute of Art. It includes potentially their parks and other public community assets that the community has. And I think one has to be really careful about what you sell off now in the short run and its long-term effects to the community moving forward. These things like the art at DIA or their parks or or complaints about the new Red Wings arena. These are strong parts of the community's identity, and one would hope that they'd be the last resort, not the first thing in an auction or sale of the assets of the community.
To what degree can or should Detroit's much better off suburbs be brought into the city's financial support system?
Well, I don't think the suburbs are going to be first in line to help out Detroit. My experience in working with communities in decline and suburban areas that ring those communities is that in order for them to participate, they're going to want to see the city of Detroit get its act together. And that, of course, is going to mean moving through bankruptcy. I think it's also going to mean turning on more services that have been shut down over the last years or so. And it's going to mean seeing more businesses come downtown so that there's a belief in those suburban areas that Detroit's doing what it needs to do to get its act together and move forward, and therefore that it makes sense for them to really help out. I was on a radio program not just this week with someone from one of those areas, and they said, why should we throw good money after bad? And I think that's going to be the prevailing attitude for a while now.
To what degree do you think we'll be seeing other Detroit-style urban financial crises as local economies hollow out and can't afford all the benefits and services of the past?
Yeah, I think this is almost a hidden problem from most of America. You know, there are, as you've suggested, there are any number of communities throughout the country, and particularly throughout the midsection of the country, that have long-term liabilities. They have declining populations, declining tax bases, and they're going to feel the squeeze. Maybe not as bad as Detroit is feeling it now, but a squeeze nonetheless. And there's a question about, are we paying attention to this problem as a country? Are we thinking about what possible solutions might exist? And how is it that these communities are really going to move forward?
We haven't talked yet about the federal role in Detroit and other cases of major urban distress beyond the federal bankruptcy court. What do you think is reasonable and politically possible in the country's current economic state?
I don't hear much of an appetite, Melissa, for the federal government to get involved, at least in Detroit, at least at this time. I live right outside of Washington, D.C., and you hear barely a whisper coming out from the nation's capital about helping Detroit or even talking about Detroit. And so, again, much like the question you asked me about the suburban areas, I think people are going to want to see Detroit go through the tough decisions they need to go through, swallow the tough pills they're going to need to swallow, get back on their feet in some basic ways before anyone's going to talk about rushing to provide aid to that city.
Richard C. Harwood is founder and president of the nonprofit Harwood Institute for Public Innovation. He's also the author, most recently, of The Work of Hope, How Individuals and Organizations Can Authentically Do Good.
Quote from the news, I spent 11 years in hell. Now your hell is just beginning. That was Michelle Knight condemning Ariel Castro at his sentencing for life in solitary plus 1,000 years for the kidnap, confinement, and rape of Knight and two other women over 10 years. Despite his guilty plea, Castro denied he ever beat or forced them to have sex.
Next, new Pope in the New World and a Vatican update for your ears only.